Well, the typical question is, who am I? Spiritual type question. And what is the reason for life? What's the purpose for life? Another is, what is my destiny? Another is this deep, driving desire to stay alive. Another thing that confronts us is we want happiness. We seek joy as an aspect of being alive. We're not looking for death, you see. We're not looking for unhappiness. What is fulfilling? Where is my peace? Why am I here? Why do I exist? And then other questions such as, how can things exist? Where does this all come from, this amazing universe? How can it be so incredibly amazing? And then a longing for some being who would exist and love and care for us most ably. That's the sort of childlike solution, because as a child, that's what we benefit from. I mean, if there wasn't someone when we're a child that just gives, with no guaranteed return, they may be schooling you to honour your parents and look after them in their old age and respect them and obey them and all the rest of it. But they're not daft. They know there's no guarantee of this. I mean, they might put a lot of resources and care into you, and they die before there's much reward at all, or you die before there's much reward at all. It's all uncertainty for them, and that's if they were myopically narrow, concerned with their own, especially physical, self-interest. But they're not. They are in many ways selfless and see you as themselves, that should be loved and cared for. It's my son, it's my daughter, it's my family, it's my joy, my reason for living, as a parent. And this they achieve with apparently, not necessarily an outstanding godliness in other respects in their life. They might be quite ruthless people in some ways, but loving their kids, as far as they can and so on. So, these are the things that, in some sense, in the back of our mind, are ever running with us. And this is the domain of the religious and the spiritual and the philosophical. We call it philosophical if you're not necessarily reasoning along the lines of a particular religious view, and by religious we tend to mean something of the supernatural, godly view. We've associated philosophy in the West with our Greek view of philosophy, which, the Greek culture obviously had its religion and its gods, but we seem to have developed from a branch of it that was, dare I say, pretty worldly. Rather more pragmatic than theological. And in some ways, Buddhist way of thinking is not so far off. It doesn't particularly present something that we recognize as a deity, although the Buddha gets pretty close to it for the ordinary common follower, of course, which may well reflect how much the ordinary man in the street does need a god of some sort. But it's very philosophical in a way, isn't it? I don't mean it's Greek philosophy, but it's not Christian theology, put it that way. It's not Judaic theology. And in some ways it seems to be an escape from Hindu theology. In some ways it isn't. It still has the same philosophical views of possibility of reincarnation and spirit beings. In some sense, the Buddha is eternal, and there are perhaps what we might call, I'm not sure they call them that in Buddhism, but things like devas or angels or, spirit beings anyway. It recognizes the spirit. Whereas philosophy, as we understand it from the Greeks, doesn't really hold with the spirit world, except in a fundamental sort of sense of what we associate with Plato of pure forms being in some sense existent, that we're in a shadowy form trying to conceptualize and understand in the physical world. Let me review for a moment. Yes, considering these fundamental questions that we first started with, like the reason for living and happiness and so on, we realized immediately that, well, yes, much of it does depend on the material, being able to breathe. It's a good start. The importance of eating, finding food, shelter, protection. But then we very quickly get on to the way we meet these needs, well, not breathing, but a lot of the others, like eating and shelter and so on, is through cooperation with others. And it's our failures to get good cooperation that seem to cost us the earth. Or if you like, putting it in the positive, it's our ability to work as a team, wonderfully and cooperatively together, that gives us a civilization which in large measure protects us and brings order and some degree of provision into our life, which sustains us well, or poorly, of course, depending where we are in that status and civilization and so forth, and on the civilization itself. So we are concerned very quickly with not just material technology, our ability to, keep warm in colder climates and find food when there's nothing growing in winter, not find it, but make sure we've made provision for it and kept it safe and so on and so forth. Not just those physical needs, which you might say the physical sciences, which are based on a physical theory of existence, or lack of it, both lack of theory or lack of good existence. It deals with how to build a house and how to build a wall and how to kill your enemy and so on, and how to kill for food even, and so forth, how to grow food, as opposed to just, but also how to hunt. Let's hunt together. A lot of small people can bring down a mammoth. Taking that childlike view of pre-ancient history. Now, a lot of it, though, is concerned with relationships. And it's this concern for relationships that in large part is the substance of religion. And relationships are a bit intangible. It's not like building a house. Go out and find some stone and some wood and put it together in the following way. It's, how do I relate to each other? Honesty, integrity, faithfulness, compassion, forgiveness, cooperation, love. And of course, much of our thought and preoccupation of mind is about whether I'm happy or unhappy. I'm seeking joy and I'm seeking peace. And I seem to need hope, or I can't get up in the morning. and I may suffer from things like fear and loneliness, isolation, or the fear might be because of oppression of others. You see, these are all areas that are not tangible, but terribly important to us, appallingly important to us, wonderfully important to us. I don't know how to describe it both. And this is the domain of what we've come to call the spiritual, in that, it seems to be there, but it's not tangible. It's more spirit than matter. And in other words, we don't just have to master the material, we seem to have to master the spiritual. How do I do that? It's not quite, it doesn't lend itself to physics in the usual way of how much matter is this and what are the qualities and what are the implications of this piece of matter coming to that, and, chemistry, and it's not like that. It's not tangible, weighable. It doesn't seem to be constrained by location, and therefore is not constrained by things like speed or resistance. But it does seem to be, it's as if sometimes you're aware of it and sometimes you're not. And if you don't choose to be aware of it, you're not. And if you do, you're very aware of it. Like, he doesn't like me. I mean, how do you measure and quantify that? It doesn't lend itself easy to objective analysis, does it? It's how do I see it and how do I feel about what's happening perhaps in the physical world, but my feelings about it affect my perception, my understanding, my consciousness of it, all affects my hope and my peace and my joy and my values. My values seem to exist but in a spirit sense, not in a tangible material sense. But they still seem to be terribly important in that they are what we understand to be in this, as we grapple with this, the spirit world, so to speak. They are important, it seems, as regards our ability to live happily and successfully and have incredibly tangible consequences. You know, if I actually think you are my enemy, I behave differently to you and you to me, of course, and I could be dead by this evening if I lose this battle. I mean, you know, it's not all. It's vitally important. It's not irrelevant because this field of understanding is spirit. And I must solve it. If not, I'm mentally ill. And what we might consider as mental illness, I'm in such a freaked out state that I can't live. And I may even destroy myself. So, it's as much life and death as finding food. I find food cooperatively, and I find spirit, life, vitality, cooperatively as well. Isolation is not a good road to go down as regards ultimate survival. What keeps me non-isolated is much of this spiritual side of things, of seeing you as my friend, being loyal, working together, sharing what we have, protecting ourselves from common enemies, coming to each other's assistance, caring about each other. Do you see it? It's love. Love seems to be, compassion, love, cooperation, integrity, reliability, honesty, keeping your word, truth, all seem to be rather vital in this spirit world. And meaning to life gives something that gives it all meaning. That the meaning to life is another way of saying what makes life valid somehow, worthwhile in itself. And from there we quickly get to, well, something that ends is not very good when we get to that end. And it worries us, troubles us, because we value not getting to the end. So we come to want more life, fuller life, happier life, more peaceful life, of course. Life full of more prosperity. You can't weigh prosperity. You can measure the things that bring it, the physical things. You can't really measure terribly well the spiritual things that bring life prosperity. It's a different, how do I handle this world of spirit, of values, of purpose and meaning? It seems to be more I mean, it's clearly something we can put our thoughts to, just as the physical things I can think of, a nice meal and a warm home. But I can't measure these things. That they're clearly important. They seem to be, well, I handle them in terms of thought. Thought affects my physical world in that if I know how to light a fire, I can do it, and I'm warm in winter. Wow, that's an achievement. Otherwise I've got to live in a warm climate, and I might not be able to do that because the drive down the road's a bit hostile. It won't let me go that far, you know. Can't live very close to the Mediterranean. They drive me out. I've got to live, you know, beyond the Roman Empire. or, you know, I'm a Neanderthal. I've got to live in the cold because the Homo sapiens seem to have the technological edge on me, and they kill me if I go too far south. They don't want to come north, of course, because it's freezing cold up here. But it's not cold for me because I've got fires and the sort of housing that keeps you warm and protected and so forth. In some sense, you see, we understand, we know in a sense what we value. And, well, we start to realize that what we're thinking is vitally important. So what we're calling religion must control our thoughts, or we can't handle these intangibles that are vital. And in fact, in the end, we can't even handle well the physical that's vital, because we can't build our cities. We're not cooperating enough. We're divided against ourselves, and the enemy wipes us out. So what we're thinking is vital. What do we need to be thinking? For fullness of life. Oh my goodness, you're into the at least the religious now, aren't you? You're dealing with the spiritual realm, the intangible thoughts, what thoughts are right and what thoughts are not right, from the point of view of what you value. And even what I value is something about thoughts. And if I value the wrong things like dominance and violence, I do end up with a sort of civilization, but it's a nightmare that's always at war and destroying some of its people in favour of the others. Do you see? My goodness, we're into the spiritual matters now, aren't we? To solve this problem. So what does Marshall find to solve it? It's an incredible help to his spiritual world, namely values, the intangibles that seem to be important for life and welfare. It's terribly important. He sees it as, if he keeps the principle of gratitude to a visualized, loving, almighty spirit being called God, then his spiritual persona, so to speak, seems to be in such good order for happiness and peace and joy and hope and creativity and well-being, cooperation with others, well, except as far as getting persecuted for not having their view, of course. Yeah, it's a bit tricky. And of course, there are certain phenomena in the world that certainly seem to be dangerous and bad, but it's not helped by not coming to terms with them. And belief in an almighty, powerful God that loves you may best help you to come to terms with the catastrophes of life. Let's, for argument's sake, like tidal waves and volcanic eruptions and windstorms and flood and drought, but also the activities of enemies, both without, from other civilizations, and from within your own people that persecute you or don't love you, or don't like your accent or your appearance or some of the things you do, or don't like your beliefs. And it may help, better than anything else, to be trusting in such a super being, a lovely, loving God. It may give you the best disposition for coping with such difficulties. I mean, it takes the worry out of it because you're trusting God. You may have just lost the wife, but, well, perhaps it's not quite the end of the world. Might be life after divorce. And you might find another partner by the grace of God. Or you may so find God that you don't need another partner. You've found life eternal. But do you see, it fills you with hope that gives you the ability to get up in the morning instead of rotting away in despair and jumping off the bridge. Do you see what I mean? Very important. Wonderfully important. Thank you, Dad. Love you. And in the end, of course, you'd rather die loving this person, God, than continue living with some of the battles. But you live with most of the battles pretty well because of your understanding of this wonderful God. We have found, and this is, as I understand it, the incredible achievement of human life. We have found an incredibly serviceable solution to the spiritual things, the intangible things that are so important to our well-being. And that solution is the notion that there's a loving Heavenly Father that's caring for us all. And the very narrow belief of a very few of us have come to this conclusion. And there's a huge body of people that semi-flirt with the idea, but it's not too real to them yet. And then in the modern world there's quite an area, not the majority by any means, but an area that a number of people who really don't hold much with this at all, and if you like, are living very much more on a material plane. And they're not necessarily the most successful. They can be very unsuccessful and very concerned, obsessed with spiritual things. Material things. And equally, of course, the spiritual person may be very successful, if you like the Indian ancient king there, Ashoka, or very poor. Maybe someone who is poor and stays poor, or poor and chooses a sort of poverty. Like Sai Baba, born very poor, and I suspect didn't live very affluently, despite all the worship he got. Yeah. Or if you like, in the Jesus story, born in a stable of humble people in large measure, although his dad was classified as the priestly class. And this notion that, he had no home of his own, birds have roosts, and so on, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He's dependent on the kindness of a retinue of women that cared for him, and the protection of a retinue of men that would protect him from, or some harm, couldn't protect him from the power of the upper class, of course, but that was all right. He used that situation in some sense in the ministry to get crucified and be noticed by, for the next 2,000 years at least, by half the world. Astonishing. In the story. I'm not saying it's a history, but you always wonder if it might be. Thank you, Dad. So it's not that our spiritual life is unscientific or irrational. It has to be rational, and it has to be very scientific in some ways. We're trying to find out what works. The whole point of science is, what works, what brings us more of what we want, and what protects us from things that could destroy us, and mistakes and so forth. It's just that we've realized that a great deal of that question is in the field of things like our values, our purpose, our understanding, and our thinking, and they are incredibly intangible, not quite the realm of physics. We're using the same reasoning ability of a thing cannot both be and not be, and still be rational and comprehensible to us. We are applying reason to this intangible field, but it's quite demanding. It's not quite like have we got instruments that can weigh and measure and observe, help our observations better. It's more of a case of what seems to work in this spirit domain of the intangibles that are important, like our ability to form societies and our ability to think consistently, and our hopes and that drive us, it's more in the realm of psychological spirit. Domain. But we're still trying to apply reason. We can't not. Reason we have gained from our experience in the physical world, the world of physics, if you like, has armed us in some sense for how do we now apply this ability in a domain of the non-physical? Thoughts, purposes, conceptions, imagination, hope. What hopes are rational? What hopes are irrational? What do I mean by rational? I'm even analysing, what's the value of the rational if it's not going to bring happiness and prosperity and peace? Because that's my goal. Right, how can I rationally pursue such a goal? Well, it's in a domain of the non-physical, much of it, how we relate to each other, the psychological, the sociological, and it's also in terms of values and conceptions and who am I? I'm not just a rock falling down a hill, bouncing from one boulder to the other. I have purpose. I can't measure purpose. I have hopes. I can't measure hope. But hope is very important to me. Love is very important to me. I'm in love. My goodness. My whole view of the physical world's changed. I'm flying. I'm happy. I'm friendly towards people. I've never seen the trees look so lovely before. Just to be with my beloved. I'm full of joy. I've found the reason for living. This beautiful dewy-eyed maiden, or this handsome rock of a husband who, oh my goodness, I will be eternally happy. Do you see, so much of our world is not the material, and our inability to prosper in such a part of our world is everything to us. Can be more important than all the success we've had in the material world. I mean, look how important status is in our society to getting the goodies of our society, whatever you see them as, the ability to go to the opera or whatever it is you value, whizzing round in your supercar, so much of this seems to turn on our acceptability in society, to get a job, to have the buying power, that we walk into a shop and we're not stoned to death. They see you as acceptable, to very much acceptable. You come in and buy my goods, mate. Do you have a chair? What can I help you with, sir? Yes. But, you can't measure acceptability, really, but it clearly is very important, isn't it? And what determines it? Their perceptions of you. That's not very concrete. How do I measure that? I mean, you're in a world of, gosh, it was so much easier dealing with the physics lab, wasn't it, and the chemistry laboratory. I knew where I was there. Everything was measurable, and I could contain it and control it and see it and, yes, experiment with it and so forth, You try experimenting in the human field, you make a mistake, mate, they may wipe you out. They get very nasty. Yes. We see that, don't we? We see, in war times where you experiment on your enemy. Goodness, if your enemy ever gets the upper hand, he's going to take revenge. You're a war criminal and you're dead, mate. Yeah. Let's not dwell on evil. Why? Because one of these reasoning in this spiritual sphere has brought me to the conclusion that if you preoccupy yourself with the evils in the world, this is extremely damaging to your happiness and your motivation, and it seems to cloud your whole system of thought and wrecks your life. Whereas thinking on whatsoever is good and lovely fills you with a hope and a happiness, a gratefulness, a thankfulness that makes you want to be devoted to an imaginary, yes, author of such. I want God to exist. One who has made these good things possible, and I feel thankful to him. I want him to exist to express the thanks and love on him. You see, it's calling out love. I want this wonderful being to exist. Wow, what an achievement. You want the wonderful to exist. You're ready for a kingdom of heaven should such exist. You found the reason for living. I don't know it exists. I do know that's what I value. And incidentally, I do find, coming back on itself, that what I value seems to greatly improve my living here, in this universe, in the reality. I find I'm prospering more than I would otherwise have done. You know, I could have sat at home despairing, suicidal, stopped eating, or ate myself to death, or just jumped off the bridge. I don't mean I've been flirting with suicide. I was already somewhat of a believer, thank goodness, when each impossibly large trial hit me. And it was my being a believer that made it not impossible, but something I weathered. Well, I don't know how well in hindsight, I could have weathered it even better, but it was pretty good in foresight, my goodness, to have weathered such difficulties. Thank you, Dad. Love you. And of course, every victory you have over the difficulties in life that are related to your spiritual view strengthens your spiritual view, that you're able to cope with even bigger problems should they come. And they tend not to come because you are living in a harmony with your spiritual side, your intangible part of yourself. And in fact, it becomes clear to you after a while that this intangible side to self is the non-physical. How can the non-physical die? What do you mean by it's not physical? It doesn't depend on the integration or the disintegration of matter. It's not of matter. Oh, you mean who I am is not physical? That's right. You've identified with the physical because in your childish way they were the toys you could handle and perceive. But now you're perceiving your non-physical. Well, it doesn't have the same features as the physical. It's not bounded. It's not located. I can, in a sense, be in any part of the universe at any time and all parts at the same time. You know, I'm a spirit being. A macro being, if you like, not a micro being. Oh. And I could see this in that even as a micro being, we were making up a society. But a society wasn't tangible. It depended on a cooperation, but cooperation is not tangible. it's a predisposition to do certain things. What's a disposition? What does that mean, for goodness sake? That's something intangible. That's something spiritual. Do you see? We were led into. The universe is set up such that you move from playing with toys to understanding the things of the Spirit, God. Well, I mean, my understanding is it ultimately means God, but your understanding of the spiritual might not be that. It might be Buddhist. Well, pure Buddhism, not the Buddhism in the street where they're all worshipping Buddha, of course. More the Buddhism that the monks like to teach and meditate upon. The ordinary Buddhist follower doesn't seem to meditate too much at all. That's the prerogative of the elite. Anyway, that's not the point here. Wow, let me pause. Well, look at this concept of time. It's 46 minutes. I've taken 46 minutes to make this recording. It's just flowed off. Apart from a couple of times when I've paused to review, what did I start with? Where did this sentence going? Time has just flown. Do you see? It's as if I've been experiencing a different dimension to time, and I must stop talking because I'm driving you mad if you're not enjoying this. Well, you probably turned off long ago if you're not enjoying it. But anyway, thank you, Dad.